So good evening. My name is Jimmer Sakowski. I have something to admit before I start. So when Lauren asked me to do this a few months ago, and I said yes, I had no idea it was going to be this big and awesome. So if I'm a little nervous, you'll have to forgive me. So I'm the owner-operator of the Chick-fil-A in Cicero, New York, but actually I'm yes, thank you. But I'm actually here tonight to really share with you my story, my personal journey is a testimony to God's goodness. Thank God for his reckless love, because I certainly had reached a point in my life where I didn't feel like I deserved it. But my story begins not too far from here, a couple hours west of here in Medina, New York, a small town in western New York. And my mom became pregnant with me when she was a senior in high school, and she graduated 7 months pregnant with me in 1972. And I joke with people, I actually graduated on that stage twice, because 18 years later, I graduated on the exact same stage in the exact same high school. But being a 17-year-old woman in 1972, pregnant with a child, was a pretty tough spot to be in. And by the way, she had been raised by an abusive alcoholic father. 18 months later, she had my brother. She married my birth father. 6 months later, they were divorced. He had returned from Vietnam, and he was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and was a really broken man. And so by the time she was 19 years old, she had 2 children, and she was unwed in 1975. And from pretty much there until high school, it was the 3 of us and whoever she was dating or in a relationship with or whatever, for most of my life. And I'm a child of chaos, right? I was raised in poverty. We spent basically our entire life on welfare, addiction, domestic violence, you name it, right? We went without every major utility at some point in our lives, multiple points in our lives. My mom is an active alcoholic to this day. But what happened for me was, at a young age, I realized God had blessed me with some academic ability, and that's the only rational explanation for that, because if you met my mom and my dad, it did not come from them, I can assure you. In the midst of this chaos, right, I realized God had given me this gift, and I grabbed onto it. I grabbed onto it and really used that to help drive my life. I got a lot of my sense of self-worth from achievement, because if you looked around my world, there was a lot of things that were happening or not happening for me as a child that would have, frankly told me either directly or indirectly that I wasn't worth a lot. It wasn't worth loving, And so, I grinded, with that academics. But in the middle of that chaos, I started seeing some things and feeling some things deep down inside, in terms of I can now tell you that I suffered from anxiety for most of my life, probably from the time I was 11 or 12 years old on. I smoked my first joint with my mom when I was 13 on my 13th birthday. I had my first drink probably when I was 12 years old. But miraculously, I graduated from high school with honors. I was able to get to college. I went to SUNY Potsdam. Started probably drinking alcoholically for the first time in college, I would say. Certainly I was, experimenting with all kinds of drugs. Graduated, got my MBA at Clarkson University, continued to kind of party, do my thing. And then I got a job with IBM out of college, I was like, man, and the thing was, like, at that point in my life, some people would say, oh, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an engineer. You know what I wanted to be? I didn't want to be poor anymore. That's what I didn't want to be. That was it. I didn't want to have to worry about money anymore. And IBM seemed like a great solution, right? By the way, in the middle of all this, I met my loving wife my last year at Potsdam. So shortly after I started at IBM, I got married, we started having children. And what I'll tell you is through this all, even as a young man, although I wasn't raised in a household where I was taught the love of the Lord, we went, my grandparents would bring us to church, and so I always believed deeply in God. I believed deeply in Jesus Christ. And into my adult life, my wife is a devout believer, and we certainly regular churchgoers. And things kind of settled down, a little bit in my late 20s. I still certainly was drinking alcoholically at times. I was starting to have a tremendous amount of professional success and started to attach my sense of self-worth to that. And then when I was about 30 years old, I was on a business trip with my boss at IBM. And his thing when he was traveling was he wanted to go to really super nice restaurants and buy really super expensive bottles of red wine. And up to that point in my life, I had never drank red wine before. And we ordered some steaks, and he bought this expensive bottle of red wine. And I remember thinking to myself when I took that bite of steak and sipped that red wine, I am never eating steak again without a glass of red wine in my life. And so really from 30 until the time I was 40 years old, I got drunk every single day, I would say. There may have been some minor exceptions to that, but they were not of my doing, I can assure you. And, I was grinding, man. That's how I'd been taught to survive with the circumstances that I endured as a young person. So, the craziness of all this was I'm getting drunk every day. I've got a beautiful wife, 3 beautiful children. I've got this good career at IBM, but I was becoming more and more spiritually bankrupt every single day. And I was a terrible husband. I was less than the best father that I could be, which to this day, it just tears me apart, because there was this promise I made to myself that I was like, you know what? If nothing else, I'm going to be the best father that I can possibly be, because I never had it, right? And I was a pretty good father in the throes of all this, but I was not being the best father I could possibly be. I drove drunk with my children, right? I prioritized my drinking over them, right? And as I got into my late 30s, the person I loved the most, my wife, started getting deeply concerned, and started expressing that to me. And I wasn't hearing it, is the God's honest truth. I was not going to listen. I felt like my life was manageable. My life was manageable. And I just kept grinding and grinding and grinding, and I got to a point where I hated myself. In fact, I can remember several times in the midst of all this perceived success, material success, professional success, looking in the mirror, probably half drunk or drunk, and looking at myself and saying, I hate you, and I meant it. I meant it. It was nothing the world could offer was ever good enough. Every time I had this great success at work, it was never good enough. I just couldn't fill this gap in my soul. And I remember, because we were regular churchgoers, I remember sitting there in church, and when you meet somebody who has deep faith in the Lord in their life, you can see it. You can almost touch it. It's like this strange glow they have around them, like they just have this loose hold on life that's inexplicable unless you have it, right? And I remember thinking to myself, man, I don't know what they have. I wish I had it, but it has escaped me. I had accepted that it had escaped me. And I was asking the Lord for a lot through all this. I was praying. In fact, I prayed often about my drinking. And I would pray, please God, help me control my drinking. Right? Help me control my drinking. Because I could not imagine a life without alcohol. I'd built my life around it. I thought about it all the time. I thought about how I can get the next drink, all my social circles, my plans, everything in my life was built around my addiction to alcohol. And so what happened for me in 2013 is my marriage was collapsing. It was collapsing, and of my own doing. It was all on me. And I knew I had to stop. I knew I had to stop drinking. I didn't want to. Desperately did not want to, but knew I had to. And so I stopped. I stopped in January of 2013. I was going to some outpatient meetings. I was feeling better, started getting my head around a few things. And about 40 days later, I had brought my two older kids, I think it was the two older kids, to church. I go to Catholic church, right? And we were going to get up for communion. As much as I love red wine, I never drank the wine at church. I chose to pass. But we got in line, and I thought, you know what? This might be a good idea. Just take the sip. It's church, right? And that was it. That was it. The seed was planted again. And I knew I was going on a family vacation to visit my in-laws, who both drank, and they had plenty of alcohol in the house. And I knew the whole way down, I'm going to be able to get mine again. And so the first night we were there on this family vacation in 2013, it was right around Easter, I did a couple flybys by the liquor cabinet, and, I call them flybys. I slept very well that first night. And then the next day, it progressed. By the way, not a little. If I could get my hand on the bottle and there wasn't somebody around, I was, getting as much into me as I possibly could, right? And then the next day I went golfing with my father-in-law. And the whole time on the course, when the bar car would come around, I'd say no. And then on the 16th hole, I said, you know what? give me a triple vodka and soda water so nobody else know what. And then it was on, right? I left the course. We went back to the house. I was sneaking drinks. And finally, my wife was like, what's going on? And I knew, right? She had made it very, very clear at that point what the ramifications were. And I woke up the next morning, and I came out of the room I had slept in, and she called me out on the porch. She said, you need to leave. You need to leave the vacation. And so I went. My father-in-law took me to a car rental place. I rented a car, and I proceeded to drink my way partially up Route 95 from Florida to North Carolina. I think I made it about as far as South Carolina. How I didn't kill myself or somebody else is only God's grace, right? And I woke up in a hotel room about 4 o'clock in the morning. I had lost track of how many days it had been. And my phone was ringing, and it was my wife. And I thought, why would she be, calling me now? And I realized after I picked up the phone, it's because now the vacation had ended, and they were starting to drive, right? And we talked for like 20 minutes. And at the end of it, I said, what do you want me to do? And she said, I don't want you to drink anymore. That's what she said. That's all she wanted. I said, well, where am I going? She says, you can go home. I hung up the phone, and I got on my knees. And for the first time in my life, I asked God for help with no caveats. I received the gift of desperation and surrender. I literally, in this hotel room, hating myself, so tired, so broken, spiritually bankrupt, and I just said, God, I can't do this anymore. I need your help. And what happened for me was almost immediately, not quite immediately, the obsession to drink was lifted. Okay? And then I really started working a program of recovery. For me, it was Alcoholics Anonymous. There's lots of great programs out there, Celebrate Recovery. But I started actively working a program of recovery. And I turned my life and will over to Jesus Christ. That's what I did, right? And, I was 40 years old at that time, 46 now. I hadn't lost the cars, the house, the job at IBM. I was an executive at IBM. I still had all the stuff, right? So God had saved me. The Lord had saved me, right? And I wanted to go deeper, when you're really working a program of recovery, it's a never-ending journey. You're trying to, as they say, peel back the layers of the onion, and really. And so I continued on the spiritual journey, and what started to happen for me was I started to think, I can't believe that God helped me get through this chaotic childhood and relieved me of this bondage of alcoholism to just be this guy at IBM who's successful, and so I started going to work kind of depressed and coming home kind of depressed because it wasn't deeply gratifying. I was not sharing the blessings that Christ had given me with others through my professional life. And so God kept putting Chick-fil-A in my life. That's a short story. But what happened for me was a guy who worked for me at IBM left IBM to go work for Chick-fil-A in their corporate headquarters. He was a man of deep faith, somebody I respected a lot. We shared a lot of values. We stayed in touch. And every time we talked, he'd say, Jimmer, man, you got to come down here. I'm telling you, you got to come down here and witness this. Like how they do things, how they, how they run the company based on Christian principles and how they treat people and prioritize people over profit. You won't believe it. And I didn't believe it, by the way. So I went down like 3 or 4 years ago for a meet and greet, thinking maybe someday I'll go work in their corporate office. And I was touched. It's the only way I can tell you. Touched by the Lord by that day at Chick-fil-A. You spend time at the corporate headquarters and you realize, man, when the Lord is at work, the people that are part of that feel part of something greater than themselves. And it's magic. I mean, it is truly magic when the Lord is part of what you're doing. And so I left there. They didn't offer me a job. It wasn't an interview. I went back to IBM. I kept grinding. And about 2.5 years ago, I was standing in my kitchen in Raleigh, North Carolina at the time. And I turned to my wife. I had reached almost another emotional or spiritual bottom. It's hard to describe. I was sober. I was working in an active program of recovery. But I knew something wasn't right, that the Lord had bigger plans for me. And I turned to my wife and I said, I know what's wrong. She said, what? And I said, I don't want to work here anymore. And that's all I knew at that time, is I did not want to work at IBM anymore. And so I picked up the phone and I called my friend Craig at Chick-fil-A and I said, hey, Craig, I'm done at IBM. Can you get me down there for an interview or something? And he said, yeah, we could probably work on some schedules. He said, have you ever thought about being an owner-operator of Chick-fil-A? And I was like, no, I have not. And he said, well, the more I meet our owner-operators, the more I kind of see you and them and you, right? And I hung up the phone and I went online and I put in an expression of interest. There are 50,000 people a year who express interest in owning a Chick-fil-A restaurant. We open about 100, of which half go to people who grew up in Chick-fil-A. So 50 out of 50,000. You can do the math. The odds are not good. And I can tell you, Chick-fil-A at every step of the way kind of says, hey, pal, don't put all your eggs in this basket because it's probably not going to happen. And so I kept looking at other I was praying, Lord, what's your will for me, And I was like interviewing with other companies. I was looking at maybe buying a small business in Raleigh. Meanwhile, by the way, my kids are like, my daughter's almost a senior in high school. I'm like, we can't move. I'm starting to put some like limits on the Lord's will. And, I was just searching. And the further I went through the Chick-fil-A selection process, there were things happening in my life and things happening in the process that I just started having this deep feeling that this might be what God wants me to do with the rest of my life, is to use a Chick-fil-A restaurant as a platform to positively impact the lives of other people. And about 2.5 years ago, I got a phone call from Chick-fil-A, and they were like, have you ever heard of Cicero, New York? And I said, well, I said yes. But I thought they might have asked 1,000 people who were in the process if they had ever heard of Cicero, New York. And there might have been only 2, and I was one of them that would have said yes. But I was like, yeah, I grew up in upstate New York. I lived in Syracuse for a brief period of time. Went to SUNY Potsdam. And they're like, we think you might be a competitive candidate to open up the first Chick-fil-A in upstate New York. And I thought, man, like that would be like crazy, And so we got interviewed 3 more times, And so about a year and a half ago, I walked away from a 20-year career at IBM to sell chicken for a living, okay? So you can imagine how that conversation's gone with some of my high school friends or fellow college graduates, But fundamentally what I did was, for the first time in my life, I put all of my trust in Jesus Christ. I just said, take me. Wherever it's going, take me, right? And so, at Chick-fil-A, our purpose is to glorify God by being faithful stewards of all that's entrusted to us and positively impact the lives of everyone who comes in contact with Chick-fil-A. That's our why, right? It's not to sell a lot of chicken. We do. It's not to make a lot of money. It's to glorify God and positively impact people's lives. And so what my life has looked like in the last year since we opened, it's been the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. The Lord did not say it would be easy. I've never worked harder. I've cried in that restaurant many times. I've had people crying in my office. We generally average about 2 a day I have in the office crying. But I've never felt more deeply gratified with my life because I know that I'm doing what the Lord wants me to do. And because of that, I get to witness miracles like every single day in that restaurant. The Lord is working in that restaurant and in what we're doing in the community, the people who work there, the guests who bless us with their business. I mean, literally every day there are these beautiful God moments that happen, and I'm just along for the ride. I'm telling you, there's days I'm like, I can't believe this is what I get to do with my life. This is just so cool, And I guess the last thing I would share with you is when I was on my knees in that hotel room, right? If you had asked me, Jimmer, I want you to dream up the best possible version of what your life could look like 6 years from now, I would have tried, because I was a selfish alcoholic, I would have tried to come up with something really good, right? It's like today is infinitely greater than that. It's not even close. And that's the grace of God. And so when I reflect back on my life, I am so grateful I was an alcoholic. I mean that. I'm not proud of some of the things I did, but I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I had the childhood I had. Grateful to God that he put me in the position, in the path to help me try to fulfill what is his ultimate, goal for me, right? Is to glorify him and to help other people, And so I can't tell you how humbling it is to have this opportunity to chat with you all tonight. I'm so excited about this event. For those of you that are struggling with whatever, addiction, disorder, anxiety, depression, there is a solution. It's a spiritual solution. I'm telling you, it's turning your life and will over to God. Right? And just letting him take you to where he wants you to go. So thank you very much, and I think I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker.